This is part two of depression and political crisis in Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. I guess the lecture's a little mistitled because we do Chile first. So this is the part where we do Argentina. And if you recall from part one, one of the the two big things we're talking about here were how the Great Depression affected each of these countries and the incredibly important role that the middle class played in how politics unfolded over the course of the 1930s. Now, Argentina is just like these other two in that it's a tremendous exporter of commodities. In the case of Argentina, it's wheat and beef, and some hides, but mostly at this point, refrigerated or frozen beef. And what's different about Argentina is that the Depression itself brings down a democracy. That beginning in 1916, there had been a democratic government in Argentina. And it now is tarred as the government that's not doing anything now that the economy is in a tailspin. So it's overthrown by the military, which has support of various elites, mostly in the agricultural sector, who want to end this government and do something to prop up exports of wheat and beef. And what they do, which is interesting, is that they kind of go backwards, that they say, look, we flourished in the 19th century with the export of wheat and beef. I mean, they flourished in the 1920s as well, but they're not thinking about that. And so we really want to have this kind of pure liberal economic order of free trade, but we don't want any democracy. Democracy has been nothing but a pain in our butts from 1916 to 1930. And so they put in place something called the Concordancia, which lasts from 1930 to 1943. And a helpful way of thinking about it is that it was almost the exact opposite of Chile's Popular Front government. In fact, some of the military leaders who were running Argentina in the 30s into the early 40s are very, very influenced by what's going on in Italy and Spain after the Civil War, and certainly in Nazi Germany. And they are very, very taken with fascism and interested in just closing things off as much as possible. Now, why did this happen in this way? Well, as I mentioned, there had been a government of this guy, well, I didn't mention his name, he had a wonderful name of Hipólito Yrigoyen, and he was the head of the Unión Cívica Radical, which is the Radical Party. And they came to power in 1916, and they won a series of elections and hold on all the way until 1930. And it really is a middle-class sort of democracy. It's a rising, urban, professional middle class. But this is unique because this is able to happen because unlike Chile in the 1910s and 1920s, where there's a unified elite, a unified oligarchy, Argentina is really in a different situation. Argentina in the 1910s and 20s had a very divided elite. And part of this, you could argue, is that its elite was divided because its economy had been so successful, had been such a major exporter of beef and wheat, that we had divisions between merchants and the actual agricultural producers. In the agricultural sector, there were divisions between wheat and cattle producers. There were even some divisions between people who raised cattle and the cattle fatteners. You have to be from a kind of cattle producing area to get this, but a lot of big cattle producers will sell their, sometimes pay. They'll either sell their cattle or they'll bring their cattle to a cattle fattener, because of course they're paid by the pound. But the point is that it was divisions in the elite that opened the door to the Radical Party, which was very similar to the Radical Party in Chile, to get power. So the paradox is that it's because this agricultural sector is so incredibly productive and profitable that people start arguing with each other because they're always looking for a little bit of advantage. So with those divisions from in the 1910s and 1920s, the middle class could make alliances with who? With various sectors of the elite. If there was an elite group that wanted more power, then it would turn to a middle class group and say, yeah, let's get together. They were almost always opposed to the workers. Elites did not like workers, and the middle class was very aspirational and was looking up, and therefore was perfectly happy to make alliances with elites. Moreover, Argentina's population growth in the late 19th and early 20th century was tremendously increased through European immigration. And if you were foreign born, you couldn't vote unless you'd formally become a citizen. Moreover, the anarchist party, which really did not like democratic politics, really thought in terms of revolution, was the main organizing group on the left. So you had Argentine citizens who were, workers who were anarchists who didn't want to vote, and you had a lot of workers who were not Argentine citizens and couldn't vote. And because of this, the radical government of the 1910s was incredibly anti-worker. So much so that in 1919, a series of strikes grew into a general strike, and the repression of this general strike is simply known as the Semana Trágica, the tragic week. So there's an odd contrast of Chile and Argentina. Argentina did have an expanding democracy in the 1910s and 1920s, brought on by a law in 1912, the Sáenz Peña law, which granted universal manhood suffrage, right? So men who were citizens, no matter their class, could vote. But as I said, so many in the working class either weren't going to vote or couldn't vote. And so that helps bring the Radical Party to power in 1916. But that meant that the Radical Party, this middle class, felt continually threatened by the much, by person, larger working class. And so the Radical Party sided with the segments of the elite that it made deals with to become incredibly anti-worker. And, that is, that's Buenos Aires in 1919. And we're talking about like literal warfare between workers and the government and elites. And so you have workers digging up paving stones to create barricades to protect themselves from the military onslaught. And there it is. There's the police and the military with machine guns to take on the workers, because at this point, the sense was that you would rather gun down masses of striking workers than negotiate with them and give them any more power. And so this is an example of the middle class looking to tie in with a segment of the elite rather than with the workers. And this helps explain why when 1930 comes, Argentina turns to the right. Because the workers are completely disenfranchised, they have no power, and just segments of the elite want to turn back the clock to even the days before the Radical Party. And so you can see once again, and members of the middle class who abandon the Radical Party are perfectly comfortable with that, because their gaze is always towards segments of the elite. And so a divided elite allows the middle class to make alliances with segments of the elite, whereas in Chile, we had a very unified elite, and the middle class made ties to a working class, but also the working class had more political participation, political rights in Chile than in Argentina.